The courtroom was busy that morning. People filled the wooden benches, whispering softly while waiting for their cases to be called. The air carried a mix of nervousness and impatience, as it always did in places where people face the weight of the law. At the very front sat Judge Harrison, an older man with sharp eyes and a stern expression. He was known as a man who liked control. Every person who stepped into his courtroom felt the pressure of his presence. Among the many faces in the room, there was one that stood out to him almost immediately. A young black girl sat quietly in the second row, her hands folded on her lap, her notebook resting neatly beside her. She looked no older than 17. Her clothes were simple, a plain blouse and jeans, the kind of outfit a student might wear on a regular school day. She seemed calm, almost too calm, and that caught the judge's attention. As the bailiff called the first case, the judge glanced toward the girl. Something about her presence irritated him, though he couldn't explain why. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She wasn't talking. She wasn't interrupting. Yet he felt that she didn't belong there. His thoughts hardened quickly. When the first case was over, he leaned forward and pointed at her. His voice echoed across the room. "Young lady, what are you doing sitting there? This isn't a classroom. Did you get lost?" The room went quiet. All eyes turned to her. The girl lifted her head slowly, her dark eyes meeting his without fear. She gave a small smile, almost polite, and said softly, "I'm fine here, sir." "Thank you." The judge frowned. The way she spoke irritated him even more. She wasn't trembling like others often did under his sharp tone. She wasn't apologizing or rushing to explain herself. She simply sat there, calm and steady. "Fine here," the judge repeated mockingly. "This is a courtroom. People come here for serious matters. This is not a place for children to sit and daydream. Are you waiting for someone? Or do you just like wasting everyone's time?" The people in the benches shifted uncomfortably. Some lowered their heads, pretending not to hear. A few exchanged quick glances but stayed silent. Everyone knew Judge Harrison's temper. It was safer not to interfere. The girl, however, stayed the same. She didn't move nervously, didn't bite her lip, didn't look away. Instead, she picked up her notebook, opened it, and calmly wrote something down. Then she looked back up and said politely, "I'm not wasting anyone's time." The judge's cheeks grew red. He wasn't used to being answered so directly, especially by someone who looked like a teenager. "You're very bold for someone who doesn't even know how this place works," he said. "Maybe you should spend your time in a classroom instead of pretending to understand the law." Still, the girl didn't react the way he expected. She didn't argue or defend herself. She simply nodded slightly and whispered, "Thank you for your advice." Her quiet dignity unsettled him more than loud words ever could. For a moment, he stared at her, unable to think of what else to say. He was used to people breaking under his sharp comments, but this girl didn't bend. She just sat there, calm and unshaken. The proceedings continued, but the judge's attention kept drifting back to her. While lawyers argued their cases, he found himself wondering who she was and why she was there. Why was she writing so much in her notebook? Why did she look so calm when most people in his courtroom were nervous wrecks? As the second case ended, he couldn't resist addressing her again. "What are you writing in that little book of yours? Notes for a school essay? Do you think you'll learn something about life just by sitting here?" The girl lifted her notebook slightly, as if to show it existed, but she didn't open it or explain. She simply said, "I like to observe. It helps me learn." Her words carried no disrespect, yet they sounded unusual in the courtroom. A few lawyers raised their eyebrows. The bailiff looked between the judge and the girl, unsure if he should step in. The judge leaned back in his chair, annoyed. "Observing? This isn't a theater, young lady. These are real people with real problems. They don't need someone sitting there treating it like a show. But once again, the girl only nodded. She didn't argue, didn't challenge him, didn't even show anger. It was as if she had expected his words and had chosen to remain still. By now, whispers had started among the audience. People were curious about her. Who was this girl who sat so calmly under the fire of Judge Harrison's remarks? Why didn't she leave? Why didn't she fight back? Some admired her composure. Others thought she must not realize the seriousness of the judge's words. The cases went on, and the judge tried to focus, but every time he caught her steady gaze, it bothered him. He thought of her as defiant, though she hadn't raised her voice once. It was her calmness that unsettled him. He wanted her flustered, embarrassed, even humiliated, but she gave him nothing to work with. At one point, during a break, the judge leaned toward the bailiff and muttered, "Find out who that girl is. I don't like distractions in my courtroom." The bailiff nodded and approached her. "Miss, the judge wants to know why you're here," he said quietly. She looked at him with the same calmness and replied, "I'm here for the proceedings. I have a reason. I'll explain when the time is right." The bailiff was confused but didn't press further. He returned to the judge and repeated her words. The judge grew more irritated, convinced the girl was mocking him. When the session resumed, Judge Harrison made another attempt. "Young lady, this will be my final warning. If you don't explain why you're here, I will have you escorted out. Do you understand?" For the first time, the girl tilted her head slightly, her expression still polite. "Yes, I understand," she said. Then she lowered her eyes to her notebook again and continued writing. The judge nearly slammed his gavel down in anger, but something in her calm voice stopped him. He took a deep breath, telling himself he would deal with her later. For now, he had cases to finish. But deep inside, the girl's steady presence had already planted a seed of unease. He didn't know it yet, but everything he had said to her, every arrogant word, would soon come back to haunt him. For now, all anyone could see was a young girl who looked out of place, humiliated publicly by a powerful judge. Yet behind her calm eyes, she carried a truth that none of them, not even the judge, was ready for. The next morning, the courtroom filled again with people waiting for their names to be called. Sunlight came through the tall windows, shining across the polished wooden floor. Everyone carried that same mix of nervousness and hope. Judge Harrison walked in, his black robe flowing behind him, his face as cold as always. He sat in his high chair, adjusted his glasses, and signaled for the day's session to begin. And there she was again. The same young black girl from yesterday, sitting quietly in the second row. She had the same notebook with her, the same calm look, and the same steady hands folded on her lap. Judge Harrison noticed her instantly, and his irritation returned. He leaned forward, his voice sharp. "You again? Didn't I make it clear that this is no place for children? Don't you have school, or at least somewhere better to spend your time?" The girl, Maya, lifted her eyes slowly. She didn't rush to answer. She simply said, "I am where I need to be." The audience stirred. Some people exchanged glances. Her voice was soft, but it carried through the room, calm yet confident. The judge frowned. "Where you need to be? Do you think this is a playground? Do you think courtrooms are open for anyone who feels like sitting and taking notes? This is a court of law, not a library." Still, Maya didn't flinch. She turned a page in her notebook and wrote something down. The sound of her pen scratching the paper was faint, but in the silence of the courtroom, it seemed louder than it should have been. Her calmness irritated the judge more than open defiance would have. He was used to people trembling before him. He was used to his words cutting people down. But this girl gave him nothing. "Bailiff," the judge ordered, pointing at her, Escort this girl out. She is disturbing the dignity of this court. The bailiff, a tall man with a serious face, walked toward her. Miss, you'll need to step outside. Maya looked up at him politely. Sir, with respect, I am not disturbing anyone. I am sitting quietly. I am here for a reason. Please let me stay. The bailiff hesitated. She wasn't wrong, she wasn't making noise, wasn't interrupting, wasn't causing any real disturbance. He turned back toward the judge, unsure. Your Honor, she's just sitting quietly. The judge's voice grew louder. Do as I say. This is my courtroom, and I will not tolerate distractions. The bailiff sighed and leaned toward Maya again. Miss, please. Don't make this harder. But before he could take her by the arm, Maya stood up on her own. Her posture was straight, her voice clear. I am not a child. And I am not here by accident. Her words froze the room. The lawyers stopped shuffling their papers. The audience leaned forward. Even the judge, for a moment, said nothing. Maya held out her notebook. She didn't open it yet, but her gesture was deliberate. Every word spoken in this room, I am recording. Every action, every remark, every judgment. And this is not for my amusement. The judge's face twisted with anger. What nonsense is this? Who are you to record anything in my courtroom? This is an official setting. Only authorized personnel are allowed to document proceedings. Maya gave a small smile. I am authorized. A hush spread across the room. People began to whisper, curious now. The girl who had been insulted yesterday was speaking in a way that made everyone wonder who she truly was. The judge slammed his gavel. Silence. Young lady, you are testing my patience. I will not allow you to play games in this court. Maya remained calm. She didn't argue further, nor did she try to explain everything right then. She simply closed her notebook and said, Your patience will be tested more than this, Your Honor. The room was silent again, stunned by her words. The judge pressed his lips together. His pride kept him from asking more. Instead, he dismissed her with a wave of his hand. Sit down and stay silent. This is your last warning. Maya nodded, as if she had gotten exactly what she wanted. She sat down once more, placed her notebook neatly on her lap, and began writing again. For the rest of the morning, case after case came forward. Lawyers argued. Witnesses trembled. Defendants pleaded. But Maya remained the same calm, silent, and observant. Occasionally, she looked up and made a small note. Her presence became impossible to ignore. The lawyers began to wonder. Some had heard rumors that an investigator would be sent to observe Judge Harrison. Could it be her? But she looked so young. Too young. It seemed impossible. And yet, the way she carried herself, the way she refused to be shaken, made them doubt their assumptions. By the time the lunch break came, whispers filled the hallways outside the courtroom. People were talking about the mysterious girl who had stood her ground against Judge Harrison. Some admired her courage. Others thought she was foolish. But everyone agreed there was something different about her. Inside the judge's chambers, Harrison paced back and forth. He couldn't stop thinking about her words. I am authorized. What did that mean? She looked like a teenager, yet she spoke like someone with authority. He felt as though he had been challenged in his own court, and the thought made his pride burn. Who is she? He muttered to himself. Who does she think she is? The bailiff knocked softly on the door. Your Honor, about that girl, yes, the judge snapped. I asked around. No one seems to know her. She's not with any of the defendants. She's not a family member. She just came in yesterday and today. Quiet as a shadow. The judge frowned. His curiosity deepened, but he quickly masked it with anger. "I don't care who she is. If she comes back tomorrow, I'll have her thrown out." But what he didn't know was that Maya had no intention of leaving. She wasn't there for curiosity. She wasn't there to watch for fun. She was there with a purpose, and every word he had spoken to her was now part of something far larger than he could imagine. As she left the courtroom that afternoon, she walked with calm steps, her notebook tucked under her arm. People moved aside as she passed, whispering about her. She didn't respond, didn't explain, didn't boast. She simply walked away, her face unreadable. But inside, she knew the day was close when she would no longer need to hide her true identity. The judge thought he had humiliated her. The people thought she was powerless. Yet the truth was that she held more power than anyone realized. She was watching, recording, waiting because soon the entire courtroom, and especially Judge Harrison, would learn exactly who she was and why she was there. The third day began with the same heavy air in the courtroom. People shuffled into their seats, their faces drawn with worry and expectation. Courtrooms always carried that weight, as if every person inside knew lives could change in an instant with the strike of a gavel. Judge Harrison entered, his robe sweeping behind him, and he sat with the usual sternness that demanded silence. But once again, before he even began, his eyes fell on the girl. She was there, Maya. Calm, steady, holding her notebook. She looked like a picture that never changed. Her posture was straight, her expression controlled, and her eyes bright with focus. She didn't seem nervous at all. The judge's jaw tightened. He could not ignore her anymore. He felt as though she was silently mocking him, and his pride would not allow it. "Young lady," he said, his voice slicing through the room, "why are you here again? How many times must I ask? This is not a public park where you can sit and watch the world go by." This time, Maya stood. She didn't wait to be asked twice. She held her notebook close and took a step forward. "With respect, Your Honor, I am not here without reason. I am here because I have been assigned to be here." A wave of murmurs ran through the courtroom. People leaned forward, whispering to one another. The lawyers at their tables exchanged glances. Assigned? By whom? The judge narrowed his eyes. Assigned? Do you think this is some kind of joke? Who could possibly assign you to be in my courtroom? Do you work for one of the attorneys? Are you a clerk pretending to play games? Maya didn't flinch. "No, Your Honor. I am not a clerk. And I am not pretending. I am here on official duty." The silence in the courtroom was heavy. The bailiff stared at her in confusion. Even the stenographer paused her typing for a brief second. The judge slammed his gavel. "Nonsense. You're a child. You should not be here. This is an insult to this court. Bailiff, escort her out immediately. I will not tolerate this foolishness any longer." The bailiff stepped forward again, but before he could reach her, Maya calmly pulled something from her bag. It was a leather folder, simple but professional. She opened it and held up an identification card. Her voice remained steady. "I am not a teenager. My name is Maya Roberts. I am an attorney, licensed by the State Bar. And I am here on behalf of the Oversight Committee." Gasps filled the room. The lawyers leaned back in shock. Some even stood to get a better look. People in the audience covered their mouths in disbelief. The girl they had all assumed was a young student was, in fact, an attorney. The bailiff stopped in his tracks. He glanced back at the judge, unsure of what to do. The ID looked real, and her tone carried no hesitation. The judge froze. His mouth went dry. For a moment, his mind scrambled to process what had just happened. "An attorney," he repeated slowly. You expect me to believe that?" Maya nodded calmly. "Yes, Your Honor. I understand I appear younger than my age, but that does not change the facts. I passed the bar at 24. I have been practicing for 2 years. And I have been sent here to observe, to record, and to report on your courtroom conduct. Her words struck like thunder. The whispers in the room grew louder. Lawyers who had remained silent for months now exchanged knowing glances. Some had filed complaints about the judge but never thought anyone would take them seriously. The judge's hands trembled slightly, though he tried to hide it. His pride screamed at him to dismiss her, to accuse her of lying. But deep inside, he recognized the sharpness in her eyes. That wasn't the look of a child. That was the look of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Silence in the court, he shouted, banging his gavel, more to cover his unease than to control the room. He looked directly at Maya. Even if what you say is true, you have shown disrespect to this court by disguising yourself. Maya shook her head gently. I did not disguise myself, Your Honor. I came as I am. It was you who assumed. You judged me by my appearance, and you humiliated me publicly without knowing who I was. I stayed silent because I needed to see how you would act not toward a lawyer, but toward someone you thought powerless. Her words cut deeper than any shout could. The entire courtroom was quiet now, listening. The judge's face turned red. He tried to speak, but his throat felt tight. He began, but Maya raised her hand slightly. With respect, Your Honor, every word you said to me these last 2 days is written in my notes. And it matches the complaints we received from others. I was sent here to investigate, and your behavior has confirmed exactly what we were told. The audience shifted. Lawyers nodded slightly, some with relief. A few even smiled quietly, though they quickly hid it. The judge slammed his gavel again, this time harder. Enough. You will not turn this courtroom into a stage for your accusations. But Maya didn't back down. Her calm tone carried more weight than his angry voice. This is not a stage, Your Honor. This is accountability. You are used to speaking without being questioned. But you are not above the law. You are not above the committee. And you are not beyond consequence. The silence after her words was deafening. Everyone felt the shift. The power in the room no longer rested entirely with the judge. For the first time, he looked small behind his high bench. Finally, Maya sat back down, closing her notebook softly. She didn't need to say more. Her identity had been revealed, and the truth was now out in the open. The judge cleared his throat, his voice strained. Proceed with the next case, he muttered, trying to regain control. But everyone in the room knew that nothing was the same anymore. The people whispered quietly as the next defendant came forward, their eyes not on the lawyers or the witnesses, but on Maya. She had changed the room by simply standing her ground and revealing the truth. The judge, once so untouchable, now looked shaken. And though he tried to act as if everything was normal, every person there knew a storm was coming, one that Judge Harrison could no longer stop. The day after Maya revealed her identity, the courtroom buzzed with even more tension than usual. News of her words had spread quickly. Lawyers whispered in the hallways. Clerks exchanged quiet remarks as they carried files. Even the janitor who polished the floor seemed curious about the young attorney who had stood up against Judge Harrison. Some called her brave, others reckless, but no one could deny that she had changed the atmosphere of the court. Judge Harrison walked in with his robe flowing as always, but his steps were heavier now. His eyes darted across the room, quickly landing on Maya. She was there again, in her usual seat, notebook in hand. Her presence alone unsettled him. For years, he had ruled this room without challenge. People feared his temper, his harsh words, his quick judgments. But this young woman, calm, polite, and unshaken, had turned the spotlight onto him. He cleared his throat and opened the session. His voice was firm, but there was a hint of strain beneath it. Let us begin. The first few cases went forward. Defendants spoke nervously, lawyers argued, witnesses stumbled over their words. But the judge's attention kept drifting back to Maya. Every time she looked up from her notebook, his heart beat a little faster. It wasn't fear of her as a person, it was fear of what she represented. She was not just an attorney. She was the eyes and ears of the Oversight Committee. And she had come with a purpose. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. He leaned forward and addressed her directly, though he tried to keep his voice steady. Miss Roberts. If you are indeed here on official duty, as you claim, then you know very well that respect for the court is essential. Yet you have chosen to sit silently, watching, instead of conducting yourself properly. Do you call that professionalism? All eyes turned to Maya. She closed her notebook gently, stood up, and spoke in her calm but steady tone. Your Honor, I have conducted myself with respect every moment I have been here. I have not interrupted proceedings, I have not raised my voice, and I have not disrespected anyone. If you feel challenged, it is not because of my behavior, it is because of your own words. The courtroom grew still. Lawyers exchanged knowing looks. Some nodded subtly, their faces showing relief that someone had finally said aloud what many of them had long thought. The judge tightened his grip on his gavel. You dare to lecture me in my courtroom? Maya didn't hesitate. This is not about daring, Your Honor. This is about duty. My responsibility is to observe and report. I have already recorded examples of your behavior toward me, and I have seen enough today to confirm a pattern. It is not just me. Others before me have filed complaints. My presence here is proof that their voices were heard. Her words struck him like a hammer. The audience, usually quiet and timid, leaned forward with interest. The lawyer's eyes shone with curiosity. Even the bailiff shifted uncomfortably, as if he no longer felt certain about which side of authority to stand on. The judge slammed his gavel hard. This is outrageous. I will not allow myself to be judged by someone who hides behind a notebook. You come here pretending to be an authority, but you forget who truly holds power in this room. Maya met his glare without blinking. Power, Your Honor, is not measured by how loudly one can shout or how harshly one can scold. True power is measured by justice, by fairness, and by respect for the people who stand before you. That is what this courtroom is meant to represent. Not fear. Not humiliation. Justice. The silence that followed was so deep that even the ticking of the old clock on the wall seemed louder. One of the lawyers, usually quiet, cleared his throat. If I may, Your Honor, he said carefully, the young attorney makes a fair point. This courtroom must reflect fairness above all else. The judge shot him a sharp look, but the damage was already done. More than one voice had now spoken against him, and the wall of silence that had once protected his arrogance was starting to crumble. Maya did not press further. She sat down quietly, opened her notebook again, and continued to write. She didn't need to argue. Her calm presence, her measured words, and the quiet support growing around her spoke louder than anger ever could. The judge tried to continue with the cases, but the energy in the room had shifted. People were no longer intimidated in the same way. They looked at him differently, with less fear and more awareness. They looked at Maya too, seeing her as a symbol of accountability. By the end of the day, Judge Harrison was exhausted. He dismissed the court and retreated to his chambers, slamming the door behind him. Alone, he paced back and forth, his thoughts spinning. For the first time in years, he felt cornered. His pride told him to dismiss her, to declare her a liar, to fight back with all his strength. But deep down, he knew she had authority on her side. If she truly represented the Oversight Committee, then every word she had written would carry weight far beyond his courtroom walls. That night, he sat at his desk, staring at the stack of complaints that had been filed against him over the years. Most had been dismissed without consequence. But now, with Maya's testimony, with her calm but sharp observations, those old papers felt heavier. They no longer seemed like empty accusations. They felt like proof. Meanwhile, Maya prepared her notes with quiet focus. She wasn't celebrating her small victory. She wasn't satisfied with making him uneasy. Her purpose was larger than that. She wanted to show the truth not just about him, but about the system itself. She wanted to prove that no matter how powerful someone appeared, no one was above accountability. The next morning, she returned once more. She walked into the courtroom with her usual calm steps, her notebook in hand, and sat in her seat as if it were her rightful place. People greeted her with quiet nods now. Some smiled slightly. She didn't smile back, but her steady presence gave them comfort. When Judge Harrison walked in, he didn't meet her eyes right away. He opened the session quickly, trying to act as if nothing had changed. But everyone in the room knew. Something had changed forever. The balance of power had shifted, and the man who once humiliated others with ease now stood under the weight of his own words. The days that followed felt different in the courtroom. People who once walked in with their eyes low and shoulders heavy now carried a quiet hope. They had seen something rare, a judge being confronted inside his own space. The fear that had once ruled the benches had started to fade, replaced by whispers of courage. And at the center of this change sat Maya, calm as ever, with her notebook resting on her lap. Judge Harrison tried to return to his usual routine. He called cases, issued rulings, and spoke with his sharp tone. But the authority in his voice no longer carried the same weight. Every word he said, he knew Maya was recording. Every gesture, every expression, every decision she was watching, and her presence felt heavier than any gavel. He could feel the eyes of the room shifting too. The lawyers, who once bowed to his temper, now looked toward Maya with quiet respect. The defendants, who once trembled, now sat taller. Even the bailiff, who had always followed his commands without question, seemed to stand differently, no longer as firm in his loyalty. On the fourth day, Maya finally stood when a case ended, not to argue, but to speak clearly so the room could hear. Your Honor, I have observed enough. My duty here is nearly complete. The room grew still. Everyone knew something important was about to happen. Judge Harrison stiffened. And what is it that you think you have observed? Maya held her notebook, the pages filled with careful writing. I have observed the way you handle those who appear weak. I have observed the words you choose when addressing people who cannot defend themselves. I have observed patterns that match the complaints filed against you over the years. And I have observed how quickly you assumed who I was, without asking, without listening, without respect. Her words were calm, not cruel. But they were sharp enough to pierce the silence. The judge tried to recover. You claim to represent oversight, but this is still my courtroom. I am the law here. Maya shook her head slightly. No, Your Honor. You are not the law. You are a servant of the law. That is what a judge is meant to be, a protector of fairness, not a ruler of people. The law is greater than any one of us, and it is to the law that we are all accountable. The audience shifted, some nodding quietly, some whispering to each other. It was as if the truth had finally been spoken aloud in a place where it had long been hidden. The judge gripped his gavel tightly. And what will you do with these so-called observations of yours? Maya didn't flinch. I will do my duty. I will report what I have seen. And the committee will decide what happens next. For a long moment, the judge stared at her. His pride wanted to strike back, to dismiss her, to call her unworthy. But his fear held him still. Deep down, he knew she spoke the truth. That afternoon, Maya gathered her notes. She walked out of the courtroom slowly, the eyes of every person following her. Some reached out to thank her quietly. Others simply smiled as she passed. She didn't respond with grand words. She only nodded politely, her calm presence saying more than any speech could. Outside, the air felt lighter. She stood on the courthouse steps, the sunlight warming her face. She had completed her assignment, but more than that, she had shown something important, that appearances could deceive, and that respect must be given before it was demanded. In the weeks that followed, an official investigation was announced. News spread quickly across the legal community. Judge Harrison had been placed under review. The Oversight Committee had taken Maya's report seriously. Lawyers who had once feared to speak now found their voices. Old complaints were reopened, and new ones surfaced. The once untouchable judge now faced questions he could not escape. Inside his home, Judge Harrison sat at his desk night after night, staring at the papers piling up before him. His pride had always been his shield, but now it felt more like a burden. He thought of the girl No, the woman who had sat in his courtroom with steady eyes and calm words. He remembered how quickly he had judged her, how easily he had spoken to her with arrogance. And now, because of that, the very foundation of his power was crumbling. Meanwhile, Maya moved on to her next assignment. She never bragged about what had happened. She didn't seek attention or praise. She carried her notebook, as always, and went where duty called her. But those who had seen her in action never forgot. To them, she became a symbol of quiet strength. She had faced humiliation and turned it into dignity. She had faced arrogance and answered it with truth. Months later, when the final decision was announced, it was clear, Judge Harrison was suspended indefinitely. His name, once spoken with fear, was now spoken with regret. Some pitied him, others felt justice had been served. But all agreed that the courtroom had changed forever because of one young attorney who refused to be shaken. For Maya, it was never about victory or revenge. It was about fairness. It was about proving that no matter how powerful someone appeared, they were never beyond accountability. She walked forward in her career with the same calm steps, the same quiet strength, knowing that the world always needed voices willing to stand for justice, even when they looked too young, too small, or too different to be believed. And those who had once seen her as nothing more than a teenager now spoke of her differently. They told her story with admiration, reminding others of the day a judge was humbled not by anger or force, but by truth, patience, and the courage of a young woman with a notebook. In the end, Maya had not only completed her mission. She had reminded everyone in that courtroom of a lesson they would never forget: never judge a person by appearance alone, because the one you try to humiliate might just be the one sent to hold you accountable.